Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. My name is Nikhil Pillai and I am the West Midlands Chair of Young Rail Professionals. Good to see you all here. For those of you who do not know who we are, YRP are an organization who have existed for over 11 years to promote, inspire and develop the next generation of railway talent. So we do this through a lot of networking and development events, and for one such event today, we've got Mark Warrender from Telent joining us. Hi, Mark.
Hello, how you doing? You all right?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good.
So Mark is going to give a presentation on Tales from an Ex-Director. Is it really that tough at the top? So that should be an interesting one. Currently, Mark is an engineering manager for transport at Telent, and he's going to take us through his career journey. And I'm really looking forward to this talk today. A little bit of housekeeping. So if you have any questions to ask on your screen, you should be able to see a tab in which there is a questions icon. So please click on that and type in your questions. And after we are done with the talk, there'll be a Q&A session where I'll read out your questions to Mark and then we'll have a conversation that way. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark and get this presentation moving. Thanks, Mark.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending. I've got quite a few slides, but a lot of them are very brief. They're just a quick picture. So hopefully we'll get through this in around about 45 minutes with some questions at the end. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes to tell you about my personal experiences of having been a company director in a very turbulent time and how that all came to be. Hopefully you'll take something away from this that will help you in a future career at some point. So what I'd like to cover today is a little bit about me, just to set the scene so you know who I am, how it all began, how I came into telecommunications, the very good times at the start, how I became a director of a company, and then the very tough times that followed and the even tougher times that followed those. And reflecting back on that now that I'm not in the moment, how do I see that? And we'll finish up with a few questions. So just to set the scene, a little bit about me. I'm Mark, currently engineering manager for Telent Technology Services in the transport division. I'm virtually married. It doesn't mean I've got a virtual wife. It just means I've got a long-term girlfriend that I haven't married. But to all intents and purposes, I'm married. We've got 2 lovely girls and 2 dogs who are also girls. I'm from Sutton Coldfield and now living in Stony Stanton, which is in Leicestershire. I did live in Australia for 6 years, in far north Queensland and in Melbourne. And my hobbies include making custom vehicles. That's a trike that I finished a few years ago. That's a trike I finished even further in the past with my good lady sat on it. Making custom anything that you make that's a bit different, you can't buy in the shops. That's what I like to do. So if anyone's in the market for a fish tank, let me know. And if anyone knows where there's a red phone box, let me know that as well. I also support the blood bikers, so I deliver emergency blood in my spare time. And in 2014, when I returned from Australia, I came overland. So I've ridden halfway around the world, and on my bucket list is very much to complete that journey and go from the tip of Alaska down to the tip of Chile. But at the moment, work is obviously preventing me from doing that, along with the current global COVID situation. So before I get into the real meat of it, I do want to start with a disclaimer, because all good things start with a disclaimer, right? You want to do a bungee jump, you want to do a parachute jump, you want to go hang gliding, you sign a disclaimer. I just wanted to get this right out there at the start. If I mention Fred or Dave, they are not real people. I've changed the names of everyone to protect the innocent, except my own name. And yeah, you can draw your own conclusions about that. The company that I'm telling you about no longer exists. It isn't trading anymore. And all the facts that I'm going to tell you are coming from my rapidly aging memory. So any errors or omissions are entirely mine. And I'll finish the disclaimer with a bit of a quote that kind of struck a chord to me. This may not be exactly how things were, but it's how I like to remember them. And that was at the start of a book about some guy called Guy Clapshaw, who's learning to fly. So how did it begin? The early days. Well, enter a very young Mark Warrender This would be 1989 at Mercury Communications, driving the latest cutting edge CRT monitor with a 386 PC running Windows 3.2 on MS-DOS. And if you didn't understand any of that, you can always Google it later. So it was 1989. I was a young trainee engineer and I was really enthusiastic, incredibly naive and just keen to learn. I was so naive, I had to look at what it meant in the dictionary. And one thing that I found straight away, and it was absolutely prevalent in late 80s big corporations, knowledge is power. That was definitely the mantra of the era. Nobody wanted to tell you anything because they would be then less valuable. They wouldn't be the only person that knew it. And it was just not a particularly good culture to be in at all. I remember getting in trouble for writing a guide on how to do switchport config, because what are you doing that for? If you do that, anyone could do that now. You just devalued yourself. And I just I couldn't comprehend that as a concept. Surely, if two people know how to do something, then someone else can help me. If I'm the only one, guess who gets to do it? But at the time, that was the culture. So roll forward about 6 years. I'm now a senior engineer in the Network Management Centre. I worked 24-hour shift. The traffic control job meant that you're in charge of all of the telephone exchanges in the cable and wireless network, because it's now become cable and wireless from Mercury. And you're authorized to do config changes on the fly. So the change management for a telephony network, as you would imagine, is quite strict. But in an emergency situation where somebody's cut a cable or a switch has restarted, you're authorized to make live changes on the fly. So you've got to know what you're doing. And at the time, a management role became available. It was a senior, an engineering supervisor role. So it would be the boss of the section where I worked. Unfortunately, the previous engineering supervisor was unwell. He'd had a heart attack and was off on long-term sick. So I thought, here we go, first rung on the management ladder, let's apply for this role, which I did. And it probably isn't going where you think. I didn't get it. I wasn't successful. And I was told the reason for that is I don't have enough experience to do a management role. And for me, that was the final thing. That was the catalyst to change. That was what tipped me into thinking, well, maybe my long-term career isn't at cable and wireless. Maybe my original thought of staying with the company, sticking with it, helping it change and progressing as I went along isn't perhaps the right thing to do. And it was the time for me to start looking an exit to pastures new. So my first takeaway, my first bit of advice is about experience. And as they say in hang gliding terms when you're learning, making good decisions comes from experience. But experience comes from making bad decisions. Now, at the time, I found it really offensive to be told after 6 years, you haven't got experience. I'd come from a trainee through an engineer to senior engineer. How can you not have experience after 6 years? And now, 25 years later, I know exactly why that I was turned down for that role through lack of experience. If that happens to you, don't take it personally, especially if you are new to the profession or you're quite young. Somebody is probably doing you a favor, because without the experience, you would be setting yourself up to fail in that role. So that was a takeaway for me. So I left and entered the good times, because this was an absolutely fantastic period of life for me. I left and I joined a company called borg-DC Telecoms Training. It was a new company. There were about 6 people in it, and they were a training organization. And it struck a chord with me, because I didn't like the knowledge is power culture when I first started. And even though that was starting to break down a bit, the idea of running training courses and showing people how things worked was great. The idea was we worked from home. This is 1996, so it's quite a novel thing. Not everybody worked from home. In fact, not very many people worked at home at all. So we developed the training courses at home. And then we traveled the world to deliver them. And I mean the world, every European capital, Africa, America, Canada. You'd be away for the week, you deliver the course, you come home. You'd be away for the week, deliver another course, and you come home. I met some fantastic people, and it was the best time ever. The training material was colour bound. It was very right out there. The competition were photostated notes that were second generation. The print wasn't square to the page. By comparison, we were streets ahead, and it was a very professional outfit. The learning curve was off the scale. You know, just when you think you know something, you try and explain it to somebody, and quite quickly you'll see the holes in your own knowledge. I had to know pretty much everything. So one week you might be doing fiber courses about modal dispersion, about OTDR tests, about different type of connectors. The next week you might be doing SS7 signaling protocol. The next week you might be doing trellis coding for modems. There was so much to learn, and it was broad as well as deep. It really clicked for me, the whole telecoms end-to-end, how things work, and was very useful. And it was just great, absolutely great. After a while, I was promoted to account manager, and this was the first time that I had any kind of financial aspect to my role. It was engineering up to this point. I'd been at borg-DC for a couple of years, and then suddenly I've got financial targets. I'm still a presenter, but I have to make Ericsson and Motorola get to above 0.5, as in £500,000 funding into the business. My workload increased rapidly. It was non-stop, but it was just great fun. I got on particularly well with the training manager at Ericsson, particularly well with the training manager at Motorola. We'd have regular meetings. They would say, can you do? I would say yes, and it was just great business. Business was good, and money wasn't a driver. I wasn't out there to make money. I wasn't out there to get rich. I wasn't out there to be famous or anything like that. We were just having good fun. And the reason for that, I think, was partly the culture of the business. It was fantastic. Everybody looked out for everybody else. If you were stuck with something, if you had a question at lunchtime, your phone was on, everybody's phone was on. You'd ring Fred, not his real name. You'd ring Dave, not his real name, and they'd have the answer. You knew who to go to. It was very early days of the internet. Internet access was a bit patchy, and websites weren't that mature. The best way to understand or answer a question was to ring one of your colleagues, and they would explain the answer to you at lunch, and you'd go back like the great wise old sage, and you'd be able to answer the question. We lived together. Where there was a training centre run by a vendor like Ericsson or Motorola, instead of having 5 or 6 people in a hotel in the area, we would rent a house. Not only did that save money for the company, but it meant that you didn't have to have steak and chips every night. Quite often you just want beans on toast. And if you're living in hotels, it's quite hard to do that. So it was a good way of keeping the weight down. I wouldn't say off, but down. And it was a good way of bringing people up to speed, because we shared a house. We'd have a room each in the house. We'd eat together. We'd explain things together. You know, it was a great way of cross-fertilizing, and it was fantastic. And the key takeaway from that is enjoy what you have and appreciate it. You know, ambition is good. Everybody wants to climb the ladder and get the next job, but don't let that consume you. If you're having fun in your job and you're learning things and working with great people, just occasionally sit back and think, yeah, this is good. This is good. I didn't realize at the time how good life was, and I had no idea of the troubles that lay ahead. So my takeaway is just look up and smell the roses. So moving to directorship, there were 2 shareholders and 2 directors at borg-DC. One of the shareholders decided he wanted to take a more relaxed lifestyle, to step down as director and become a silent shareholder. That left one director, the MD. So one man alone can't run a company that's now approaching 40 people and has a large turnover. So a new suite of directors was required, and the directorships were advertised internally. They wanted internal growth, organic growth, not external, and I applied for a directorship and I got one. So I was delighted at that, and we all rushed to sign the 28A form, which when you sign that, it's a legal document registered at Companies House. You are now a company director. Anybody can look you up on Tinterweb and they'll find for that company, if they fill out the form, send in 15 quid, you can find out who's a director, who's a secretary of that company. And it's out there for all to see forever. It's quite an important legal document. You are responsible for that company until you either sign a 288B and resign, or the company goes into liquidation. And it's an important, very important role. Limited liability of a company means limited liability to the shareholders, not the directors. The directors are responsible financially and legally for that company and can go to prison if things go wrong. So be careful what you sign, especially even now for us in rail, you know, NR 2009 forms, Form 40, Form 41. If you want to be a CRE or a CEM or a DPE or a PE and it's a nominated role, when you sign, you are responsible. So just be absolutely 100% that you know what you're getting yourself in for. Because now I am Mark Warrender, Image Director of borg-DC. Fantastic, great. It's an established and growing business. I'm 30 years old, it's 2001. The salary is very good. I'm responsible for marketing externally, our external image, and I'm responsible for HR, personnel, our internal image. That's where the image director comes from. So we all sign a form and we're all directors. Well, the directors sign the forms, and we're now incorporated with the business. And the first thing that I had to do was to give someone the sack. It wasn't a task in the sense that, right, now you're a director, I want you to do this. But we had a relatively new presenter on probation, and they had taken a lot longer than usual to learn the content. They'd had to sit on courses extra times. They'd run a couple of courses with low scores, and they quite clearly weren't going to cut the mustard when it came to becoming a technical presenter. So I'd made a decision that it was time for them to go. We had a director's strategy meeting that was coming up the following week. It was in France. I didn't want this to linger on and have to be thinking about this and worrying about this while we were trying to strategize the following week. I wanted it to be fairly swift. And I thought this was going to be the moment that broke the camaraderie. I really thought when the word gets out that you've driven up to somebody's home, you've given them the sack, they're not with us anymore, you've collected their assets, the laptop, the printer, that kind of thing. That's the point at which people will say, oh, okay, I can't be your mate anymore because you're now the director, and I can see that there's a line that's being crossed, and I was ready for that. You know, I was prepared for it. You can't be all things to all men, and I thought this was going to be the moment. Not quite what I expected at all. So I took some legal advice. In the village where I live, the bloke next door but one was a solicitor specialising in employment law. So for a few bottles of wine, he would oblige and give me information about legal obligations of a business. And the first thing I found was that what you're legally obliged to do and what morally you should do are miles apart, and it can be really quite disillusioned. I remember sitting down, we were just having a small glass of wine, and I explained the situation, and he said, have they been here for 2 years? I said, no. He said, I'll just sack them then. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if they've got no right to an employment tribunal less than 2 years, and if they're on probation, you don't even have to give them a reason. And I remember being quite disillusioned by that, because I'd always felt that the law was there to protect you. That's fundamentally what it's for, to protect people from unscrupulous employers. And I'm trying to do the right thing by making sure we don't fall foul of the law. And suddenly I just find that actually you can do what you like. So that for me was quite disillusioning. So I decided that I wasn't just going to go and sack somebody, that I would make sure I dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and at least to do what I would expect someone to do if I was the person that wasn't able to deliver the training course. So I'm driving up to Dave, not his real name's house, to say, I'm sorry, Dave, but you know, we can't continue this. You're on probation. This isn't going well, and that's really it. With a week's notice, driving up, and in my mind, have I given them every opportunity? Have I given them a fair warning? Are they going to expect it? And have I got all the information, the start date, you know, what the severance pay is going to be, the end date, the reasons behind it, the scores from the training material, got all that evidence, absolutely everything. And we sat down to have the discussion, and it was absolutely fine. He was fully expecting it, totally aware that this was going to happen. It even packed up all the gear ready to give to me to take away. It's one job where you either love it or you don't, and you can do it or you can't. Standing up in front of people every week delivering technical training isn't easy to do, and some people just aren't, they don't have the personality type to do that, and until you've tried it, you don't always know. So the key takeaway, the thing that surprised me more than anything else, was that line that I thought was going to be crossed wasn't crossed at all. In fact, it was the opposite. I felt even more part of the team. They felt more valued as a result. I think the net effect of that was that they could see that I was protecting the high standards. The other people in the team, the wider team, could see that we weren't going to carry people. They all knew there was a problem. There are no secrets in a company like borg-DC. Everybody knew there was a problem. Everybody knew something had to happen, and they all wanted the right thing to happen, and that was for the problem to be dealt with. So the key takeaway, good discipline benefits all of the staff, not just the people that need the discipline. And the individual was very relieved, but the one thing I didn't check, and is my last takeaway from this situation, I get to the guy's house and he's just sending the kids out of the room so we can have some privacy in the kitchen, and there's a whole load of birthday cards on the windowsill. And I said to one of his kids, I said, was it your birthday or is it your brother's? And he said, it's Daddy's. So the one thing I missed was his birthday. So everything, check everything. Okay. Then after that came the tough times. Okay, so the markets are now on the downturn. The dot-com bubble has burst, and training, of course, is the first casualty. Whenever people start to rein back cost, training is an easy one to stop spending on. 80% of our business came from one customer, Nortel Networks. And I was always trying to change that. How can we make it so that one customer doesn't hold the whole keys to the success of the business? And the answer is you can't, because you don't want to say no to more work from your best customer, but you can't force other customers to reach that level of spend. And it's a common business issue that a lot of businesses face. Training days were falling rapidly. Cancellations were coming through daily. And on average, it's about £1,300 a day impact per course. So you cancel a 2-week course, that's 13 grand. Disappears from this month's income. On a good month, we do 95 days of training. So it gives you an idea of the size of the business if you do the math. That's an average course price. Some courses are more expensive because they're a bit more specialist. They'll be upwards of £2,500 a day. So we're looking at potentially a redundancy situation. There's a board meeting in July, and we had the board meeting with the bank manager. We called him Babyface because he had a very useful appearance. Youthful appearance, sorry. So he was called Babyface. We all wore nice suits. It felt sometimes like you're a bit of a gangster in the boardroom, and that part of it was still fun. But Babyface, the bank manager, said we've lost £88,000 for July. That's gone, money gone. Okay, we've already looked at the cost in the business, and we've already changed the printers, we've already changed the electrical supply company, we've released some of the vehicles, we've looked at all of our software licensing costs, we've looked at the infrastructure that we've got around the company, and telephony charges, mobile phones. There's one remaining cost that we can do anything with, and that is the cost of payroll. So across the board, we go around the room, does everyone agree that the only remaining course of action is compulsory redundancy? Yes, we're looking at between 3 and 5 presenters and the 6 people on probation. And the MD looks across the boardroom and says, when can you have that done? Just as if I'm going out to get some pizza. What time are you getting the pizza? When can that be done by? And that's really quite a moment when you think that's something I'm going to have to do, and that's going to be pretty tough. So how do you manage a process like that? I'll just shut the door. How do you manage a process like that? Because it is emotionally draining, it's utterly draining as a process. It's like choosing which friend or relative is going to die. Who goes out of the airlock? Who goes over the side of the hot air balloon to save the rest of us? And it was compounded by the fact that it was such a good company with so many great people in it, people that you've recruited, people that you've lived with. And that's the point where the line that I felt would be crossed much earlier was finally crossed. There's nothing worse in my mind than sitting down with somebody and having to say, no, that's not 3, that's 2. And that means your score is 7 and you are below the line. And that means that you no longer have a job in this organization through no fault of theirs. And it's utterly soul destroying. So it can be incredibly tough. And funnily enough, if you had to go into a different organization and find 10 people objectively to become redundant, that would be relatively straightforward because you don't know the people and you can be completely objective. But when you've got skin in the game, as they say, it's so much harder. So legal advice is a must. I must admit, I did have to invest in quite a few bottles of red wine to get enough advice from the neighbours, and again the advice was quite disappointing. We'll just sack the 6 people on probation, there's an easy win for you. And it didn't fit with the way the business was structured and the way business was run, so I didn't do that. And then of course you've got to manage the message because you're expecting the business to survive and the remaining employees to do well. And it's a no-win scenario. You know, there's no right way to deliver the news. I imagine, though I've not done it, if you're a police officer having to deliver a notice of death to a relative, it's the same type of thing. We brought everybody in. I wanted to deliver the news face to face. I did Birmingham Training Centre, the MD did the Lake District. And at the end of that, everyone said, well, we knew what was coming. We're not daft. We could see we're not busy. And why else would you bring everybody up to Birmingham? So there isn't a right way to deliver that news, but it is incredibly tough. The takeaway from that, though, is despite that intensity of the moment and despite quite often the sleepless nights and worrying if you've got the right people or the right selection criteria, and you know, could you have done it differently, and maybe we could have saved the business if we'd done something else, everybody came through it. You know, redundancy feels like the end of the world. It really does. And that's, you know, if you're made redundant, but to make people redundant, it really feels like the end of the world, but it isn't. You know, everybody came through it. Nobody was jobless or homeless or suicide victim at the end of that. You know, some people did very well and got very good jobs on the end of it. And I think partly some of that is due to the network that everybody would have had, because every week all of the instructors were going to meet 8 or 12 people from the telecoms industry and impress them pretty much. So I think that's probably a contributing factor there, but it's definitely the toughest test of character that I've ever had to go through. And the key takeaway is, if it happens to you, you will get through it. You will get through it. The people that go will get through it. And some of us, we're still friends on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So then came the really tough times. After the tough times came really tough times. So what happened next? So I had a board meeting in August the following month. Further heavy losses for July. We're out of money. We've run out. Bookings for September currently stand at 3 days, and their provisional date's not firm. That means your likely income for September is 5 or 6k if it's not cancelled. The bank have not agreed to extend the overdraft past £500,000. Babyface says no. And part of the reason for that, I think he summed it up really well. He said, if you look, Mark, he said, if you owe the bank 10 quid and you can't pay them, you've got a problem. If you owe the bank 10 million quid and you can't pay them, the bank's got a problem. And this is a problem we don't want. And that said it all. When the bank withdraw the support, you know that you don't have a viable business, because the bank are very astute. The bank, they're quite risk averse, but they're very astute. And you know at that point that pretty much it's all over. So the options available were a director's personal guarantee to pay the August payroll. Now, if everyone had agreed to that who was a director, we'd have an individual exposure of about 50k. So I was looking at have to remortgage my property, still had a mortgage, but remortgage it. So I could release £50,000, give it to borg-DC, the company, so we could pay the staff. And I was looking at doing that, but unfortunately not all of the directors were in a position they could do that, which meant that I would be paying more than one share of that fee. And looking at the next month's income, this wasn't a short-term blip. This was a longer-term, markets down. And when we talked to the people at Nortel, our biggest customer, it became apparent that Nortel were also in a lot of financial trouble. They'd subsequently stopped trading as well. And that really was where the writing was on the wall. So the financial director agreed to investigate how to go into voluntary liquidation. It's not something that really anybody learns about. I suppose if you went to business school, you might. And it's not something that you really think about, because I tell you what, today I'm going to learn, I'm going to self-learn, I'm going to learn how to liquidate a business. It's on nobody's radar because it's not what anybody wants to do. So the financial director, Fred, not his real name, said, I'm going to go and investigate that. And the directors unanimously voted that I was having a week's holiday. It was the end of the wave of redundancy. They could see the toll it had taken on me, and they said, go away for a week, leave your phone, leave your laptop. Wasn't the exact phrase they used, but this has been recorded, so maybe watched by children. But the effect is that I had an enforced holiday. So I went away for the week. I went away to Ireland. I flew hang gliders for the week. No phone. Nobody rang me at 10 at night, at 12 at night, at 2 in the morning, at 6 in the morning. And that was what was happening. People who were on the list, who were worried, people's wives ringing me up, people's family ringing me up. That's the kind of place that you can get to in this scenario. So it was great stress break for me, my circuit break, to stop my head being fried. And when I came back 1 week later, I rang the MD when I got off the ferry, and he said, it's all over, Mark. Armstrong Watson, they've received borg-DC and we're now in receivership. I said, what? He said, oh yeah, it was easy. We just made a phone call. We made some inquiries. We spoke to some bloke with a really memorable name. And he said, yeah, I'm going to send you a few forms as long as you've got a majority among the directorship. Fill them out and it's all done. So it's an instant seizure of all the assets of borg-DC, and they were in liquidation. And at that point, the weight of the world just lifted. It was so serene and so peaceful. It wasn't in any way a sense of failure or having failed or let anyone down. It was just over. It was just over. And finally, I can only liken it to if you've got somebody who's a long-term terminally ill in a lot of pain. There's a great sadness when they die, but there's also that relief that it's over. That's the closest thing that I could imagine will be like this. There was no sense of failure, but there was a great sense of futility. All the pain, all the emotion from the previous months of doing those redundancies and the consultations, and it was all for nothing because we're all in exactly the same position. We're all compulsorily redundant at exactly the same time. And it was just, yeah, a flood of emotions at the time. So it's all over, but is it? Because the payroll for August wasn't going to be paid. And we had 3 people still out presenting courses, and one of those was abroad, who would potentially not get his hotel bill covered and his flights covered to come home. Nobody was paid for August. I rang the 3 people who were out training, and they all decided they were going to finish the course they were delivering. It was a Tuesday, and they worked Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, finished the course, collected the reports, and they all got really good scores. The guy that was abroad said, don't worry, if nobody picks up the tab, I'll pick up the tab. But we made sure that he was reimbursed for his accommodation and track back home. We did all manage to get compulsory redundancy. It comes from taxpayer money. So when a company goes in liquidation, there is a compulsory redundancy that you can claim. You fill out some forms. It's the minimum wage for a week's national living wage times the number of years that you've worked for the company. So, you know, it's not quite a month's pay, but it was pretty close for most people. And any outstanding holiday pay, you can also claim that. And you have a form to fill out that needs to be signed by a company director to say that that's an accurate reflection of the amount of holiday pay you were owed, and then you claim it. And funnily enough, everyone had the full 20 days of holiday. It was the least, you know, the least we could do. So it made the press. This is from the Westmoreland Gazette in 2001. At that point, we'd already made some redundancies, so we didn't have as many people on the head count. And when you see it in the paper and on the news, that's when it really kind of hits home that it really is over. You know, it's finished. It's over. And it's very, very sad. But now when I look back, it was great. Even the tough times, as tough as they were, it was still worth doing, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I say it's over. It's not quite over because there is still the creditors meeting, and the creditors meeting is where the liquidators hold a meeting and anybody that's owed money by the company can go and attend. So it's held in the Lake District, close to the head office, and it was attended by most of the staff because they're owed money by the company, and some small businesses who were owed. The only business that I felt sorry for was a printing firm. We changed the printers about a month before it all ended because we found a local firm who really wanted the business, and they were prepared to print for a lot less. And in their eyes, we'd done this deliberately because we knew it was all over. That was, nothing could be further from the truth. And it's a shame. It didn't kill the business. It just meant financial, that they weren't getting the money that they were expecting. And as a small business, you know, that can hurt. So that's the only real people that I felt for in that. Some of the directors, what you do is there's like a bench at the front. The directors sit at the bench of the liquidators, and the creditors sit in the crowd, and they can ask any question they like about anything. So, you know, when you placed an order for this kit, did you know at the time that you didn't have enough training? Those type of questions. Was that a deliberate action for this? And you have to answer it. You know, that the accounts are available. I'm not sure if they put the minutes of the directors meeting public, but certain aspects of them would have been. But some of the directors were in the crowd when, to my mind, they should have been on the bench. We were all in this together. We made decisions jointly, and that was minuted, but they didn't have the spine to face the people that were owed the money. And it wasn't as tough as I thought it would be. It's certainly not like the movies, and the creditors didn't look like that, thankfully. But But we did have to walk through the crowded room at the end of it, and some people to this day, I'm sure, are convinced that we've run off with the money, and that definitely isn't the case. Prior to the meeting, I did find out that you could hire a Ferrari for the day for £500, and I said to the MD, shall we just get one each and park them outside and then just razz off at the end? But we decided that probably wasn't the best the best thing to do. So that's the creditors meeting, and after the creditors meeting, and it all kind of dies down, that was the end of borg-DC. And I think the key takeaway for me, having subsequently started a business of my own after Borg, starting a business is easy. You need £400 and you need 2 people to sign 288A. And so is liquidating one. It's the bit in the middle that's the hard bit, and that's the bit we're all in at the moment. Now, the liquidation process was really swift. Initiating the process was really easy. And the key takeaway is not all businesses survive, especially now with the COVID. Even with all the help that the government are doing, and that's fantastic for small businesses, some businesses will go under, and there are people now I know out there that will be in a similar position, looking at headcounts, looking at selection criteria, who's above the line, who's below the line, and some people out there right now having a shitty time, and I really feel for them. I really do. So, almost in summary, reflecting back now, what can I pass on to you? What was the point of this? What was I trying to do in this particular webinar when I got approached by Askin and Vina? I think it's difficult to see what anybody could have done to save borg-DC as a company. You know, it was a shining beacon of how good a company can be. The whole family of the company, everybody was rewarded well. The expenses policy was great. It was generous. It was short. It was succinct. We didn't need a lot of rules because everybody played by the very few rules that there were, and within the spirit of how things should be. But it was a victim of being in a very niche market that was very buoyant for a period of time and then non-existent. I think I've been very lucky to see all these aspects of a business. It wasn't pleasant at all, but it's certainly an experience. And this comes back to my early point. If somebody says, I don't think you're ready for this, you haven't got the experience, trust me, they are probably doing you a favor, and don't take it personally. I'm hoping that sharing this insight will help you to make future career decisions, particularly if you've got good ambitions to get right to the top. At some point, a great career opportunity will arise, and it may not be in your own organization. And if you really want it, that's great. Go for it, and I hope you get it, and I hope you succeed. The rail industry is quite different to the training industry. There's more chance of success, but just do it with your eyes open. It is not all plain sailing. And even when business is good, there will be areas of business that aren't so good, and you may still be faced with a redundancy scenario, even in a buoyant business. The bigger the company, the more likely that is. Those are my key takeaways, and that's what I want to pass on to you. Is it tough at the top? Yes, you bet. It's really tough at the top. It's very rewarding as long as you can do what you think is the right thing to do, what you genuinely think is the right thing to do, with the interests of the employers, the employees, the shareholders, and the customers, all of those at heart, then I think you'll do well. Those are the tales of an ex-director. I did say about 40-45 minutes, so we're more or less on time, and I'll open the floor to any questions. Thank you for 18 of you for sticking that out.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was a really interesting presentation, and it's great to see in how many different areas you've got experience, and you had a really rewarding career, and there's lots of things that we can learn from you. So as Mark said, if you have any questions, please put them down in the question tab, and I'll ask them to Mark on your behalf. But I'd like to start with one question of myself. So did you have, in the beginning, when you transitioned to a more managerial role, did you see any conflicts in prioritizing between doing some of the technical stuff and focusing on the managerial role? So what would your advice be to technical engineers or technically minded people who want to become
management?
Yeah.
It's difficult. I was lucky that we lived in the same house. So I didn't have a 9-to-5 opportunity to get the management and the technical done. Because we lived in the same house, it was much easier, almost naturally, to assume that role. You know, part manager, almost like dad. So that was easier to me. But you're right, there's always a conflict. Once you step into a management role, you always have 5 minutes. If someone who works for you says, have you got 5 minutes? The answer is yes. Regardless of what else you've got to do on your list of jobs for the actual work, you have 5 minutes, because you don't know if that 5 minutes is going to be, oh, can you just sign me this? Or if it's going to be, I've got a problem, my dad's died, I need some help, or, you know, I've got into drugs, I'm really in trouble. You have to have 5 minutes, and that is the conflict. There's no excuse for a manager not to have 5 minutes when you ask for it. That's the conflict.
Okay. So did you have many people to support you? Did you prefer delegating most of the technical tasks to other people? So in the beginning, was it a bit different for you?
It was quite different, because I think we didn't make anything between us. We weren't doing a delivery for rail. It wasn't a project where we had a designer and an implementer and somebody doing surveys, and we didn't produce something that would make a red signal go green. They were training courses. So pretty much when somebody's out delivering a training course, they're on their own. You're in the classroom, you're on your own. So it was quite tricky sometimes to make a strict analogy between what I do now, what we produce at Telent, and what we were doing at Borg, because they're so different.
Right. Thank you. We've got a question. I'm just trying to navigate through this tab. Yep. Yeah, so the question is, hi, Mark, thanks very much for the talk. Definitely very interesting and a lot to take away. You did mention that looking back during the role itself, did you ever regret taking up a senior role as a director? Did you think you would have been happier if you just stayed at your current role where you did enjoy it?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, because one thing that I didn't put in, because I thought I might run out of time, there's a guy who works at Vodafone now. Vodafone are the company that Mercury Communications ultimately became. He's sitting at the same, well, maybe not with COVID, but he was pre-COVID sitting at the same desk doing the same job that he was doing when I joined in 1989, and hasn't done anything in terms of career progression. And I know him really well. I spoke to him, I said, what, did you not want to do something different? And he said, no, I'm quite happy. I have an inbox of work. I know how to do the work. I do the work, I put it on the outbox. I never get in trouble. I can just deliver this at 5 o'clock. I put my coat on, I go home, and I don't think about it. At 9 o'clock, I come in and I just carry on. And it's great. I have no stress. I have enough money. Thank you very much, but no ambition. And I used to think, oh, this guy's a fool. You know, you could be better. You could do more. And there were times when I thought, actually, I know who the fool is. I should really just not have taken that job and just had anything for a quiet life, anything for an easy life. But I think you're the type of person that either you want that next thing, and you'll never be able to stop yourself from saying, actually, I don't want that. It's only maybe now that if I was offered something similar at Telent, which is probably unlikely, to be fair, but I would think very hard before signing that 2884.
Thank you.
You don't know when it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it's too late, isn't it? You can't take it back.
True. I guess it was during the tough days when you must have thought more about it.
Yes, yeah. But equally, at any point I could have just resigned. I could have said, you know what, I've stuffed this. And it never crossed my mind that there was a walk away option. You know, because I could have said, I'll help. If I go, you've got less people to pay, one less person to make redundant, and I'll find another job. Don't worry about me. I'm gone. That was never the answer.
Okay, thanks. We have one more question. Coming from an MD position in a company of 40 employees to now engineering manager in Telent with over 2,000 employees, do you feel some of the pressures for the role are still the same? Great talk, by the way. I thought it was very insightful.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed part of the question. You were just breaking up there for a moment.
Yeah, sorry. I just said, the question is, do you feel that the pressures for the role are still the same as your previous role?
In the role I'm in now, or for a director?
Yeah.
Not as much, because it's a bigger team and I don't know the people as well. But certainly, you know, when it comes to looking at the possible impact of COVID and what if scenarios, I can still feel the same pressure and the same cloud that's always there. You may have to undertake an activity which is particularly unpleasant.
Thank you. Yeah, the next question from me is, you said you also worked in Australia. So
yes,
Australia and England have two different work cultures. So what was it like working there, and what country do you prefer?
It was fantastic and I loved it and I would have liked to stay. But I think my partner was missing the family. So we went there, we lived there, and then we came back. And then when we came back, I worked for the ambulance service in the control room, looking after the technical equipment there. And that was, I just couldn't do it. So we went back to Australia and then we came back to England again. So I loved it. The culture was great. It works for me. There's a lot less political correctness, but there's no malice behind it. You know, people just say things as they see them, which is quite refreshing. But unfortunately, we're back in England and that's where we're staying.
Okay.
I'd recommend it though.
Thank you. So how much support did you have to function as a director? So what was the sort of things that you took up, and was there anyone, did you have an executive assistant and other people sharing some of the responsibilities?
There wasn't, you know, looking back, I think where I am now at Telent, we've got a Managing for Success program, we've got Stepping into Management program, and they're fantastic. They're 2 years long. There's webinars, there's seminars, there's courses about the whole range of things that you might be expected to do as a manager. But when it becoming a director, you were just a director, and that was it. Off you go, carry on. And as soon as you're in the role, people want to know, what's your marketing budget for next year? Then how much we're going to spend? What do you think is the best way to spend it? And they're just opinions, pretty much. You know, there isn't a right. A lot of these things, there isn't a right or a wrong answer, and you only find out in a few months when you get the business or you don't get the business, or you make the profit or you don't make the profit. And that's kind of the I wouldn't say it's a scary thing, but it's quite an eye-opener that it's really just down to you know, your opinion and what you think is the right thing to do, and you can't really train someone for that.
Makes sense. Thank you. So our next comment is, great webinar session, Mark. Certainly learned a lot from your journey. What are the key skills, in your opinion, to have if you are in a management role?
Key skills for a manager, I think listening is the biggest one, and properly listening. So not just what people are moaning about, but what they're not moaning about, what they might mean. Not everybody says exactly what they're feeling. They'll say some of it. So if you can really listen and find out what people really think, that's the only way to do something about it. That's the biggest skill for me, making sure everybody's okay, because the only way to succeed is for everyone in your team to succeed, and you've got to look after the people.
Thank you. Our next question is from Roger Brent, and the question is, are there any particular courses or skills you would suggest to someone to study/learn if they wish to progress to a director level role? So
yeah, so I did get, we joined the Institute of Directors, and I don't know, to be honest, if you have to be a director to join, but they were quite useful. We joined because we got free access to the meeting room and free tea and coffee in London. Don't tell them that, but I think looking at them now, the Institute of Directors would be a good place to start. Another place to go would be, if you look at small, they're probably not on at the moment with COVID, but there were a lot of small business networking events. And if you go to one of those, you'll meet 20 MDs. They're only MDs of small to medium companies, but they will quite happily give you their time once they know you're not trying to sell them something, and you might get some insights from those people. So there are places where I would start. Every company will have its management program, will have its HR rules and its HR tools and its processes, and you need to know those in any particular business. But outside of that, if I want to be a director, I think I'd approach the Institute to start with, if that's specifically what you want.
okay, thank you. So a follow-up question from me. Many people think that doing an MBA is a very beneficial thing to do, to be in a director's role. So what are the main differences that you see in directors who are academically qualified with an MBA and not? So
I think that depends on the size of the company. I mean, if you just want to be a director, you can spend £100. You can start a company. You need to convince somebody to be the company secretary, and you become the managing director. You don't even have to trade. You just need a company name that's not used. Boom, you're managing director, and that's it. It's as simple as that. But in a meaningful sense, I think if you wanted to become a director of any large organisation, or any organisation with a bit of credibility and unless it's grown organically from a very small business to medium size, you'd need an MBA. I think, you know, to approach a board of directors and to be accepted onto that board without that certification and stamp of approval from the educational authorities, I think you would struggle. So that for me, it doesn't. It's not the entry ticket, but it would be an entry barrier if you don't have it. So definitely worthwhile doing if you can.
Okay. So would you recommend our young members to do it after they get into a managerial role and they have some experience, or would you recommend them to do it beforehand and then get into the industry? So if someone's looking for a post-grad role,
I think it depends where it fits in your life. If you're a period of life where you can fit it in without too much extra impact on yourself, you know, you perhaps don't have kids yet, or you're in a role that allows you to get some time back to study, that's the right time to do it. I wouldn't say there's a before I apply for a role, or as soon as I've got the role I should start on this track, you know. And I think any employer, whether you have it or not, if you said I'm going to get this, or I'm in the middle of studying towards it, even if it's open university over a longer term, the fact that they can see that you're heading in that direction would be enough for a lot of businesses.
Thank you. To end on a positive note, so where do you see yourself going from now? And I guess you must be very content with life, and you've done so many different things. So what's next for Mark Warrender? And
yes. Very good question. I don't feel like I have to prove anything anymore, and I don't automatically want the next job. So that the next job for me at the moment would be MD of Transport in Telent, and I know that it's highly likely that that would be an option for me anyway. But if it was, I don't think I would want that level again. Certainly not of a company that the size of Telent, and certainly not when it's doing so well. Because there's only one way from the top, and that's down, you know. But yeah, I love what I do now. I love the company I'm in, and if that continues, I'd quite happily just carry on at that, or the next opportunity. But it would be a big project on a sideways way, I think, much more likely than further stepping into a board position.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. It was a really insightful talk. It was a very unique talk as well. We generally have people talking about technical projects, etc. And it was really interesting to hear from your perspective what it's like to be a director, and some really practical tips of how to conduct your professional life as well. We really hope that we can invite you in the future to a face-to-face event. So we usually have our events at WSP. So that would be very good as well. And we can all network at the end of the event and get to know each other a bit more. So thanks, Mark. Are there any last words of advice you'd like to give our members?
Put the kettle on. It's about dinner time. Now, I think you've probably had it all. I'd be delighted to join you if you can manage a face-to-face event. And yeah, just if you get the chance to go into a senior role, go in with your eyes open. Don't just think of the money. Don't just think of the kudos and the job title. Think about what that actually involves. Not now when things are good, but what it might involve if the company hits the market and the market isn't right for the company.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our attendees for being here today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.